who needs to be a buyer? You wrote a great column, as usual, for Yahoo Sports. You highlighted the 49ers and their issues in the secondary, or at minimum with the scheme in terms of the connectivity between the rush and the coverage. But in your mind, who needs to be a buyer? We're trying to figure out who the sellers are now that everything's so muddled up. But who needs to be aggressive? Who needs to be desperate, if not aggressive, to buy?
I think everybody should be a buyer at some level. We don't have people. I don't know if people have noticed this yet, but two things are happening that are weird this year. Number one, scoring is down, and no one's really figured out yet why that is. And then number two, there's no clear favorite. Like there's no every Super Bowl favorite's been blown up now at this point. They've all had games where we're like, wait, whoa, hit the brakes.
Yeah.
Every single supposedly dominant team has been brake checked to hell at this point.
And even Philly 7-1, there, it's not it's not a smooth 7-1. Yeah.
It is not a smooth 7-1. And the record looks smooth, but the games have not been smooth. And you see that by Howie. Now, Howie Roseman is always active.
He's always going
to be active.
Yeah,
but
he just calling just because.
but I do think the application this year is because he knows, like, hey, no, we do have, we need a linebacker. We need a safety. That safety need was glaring, and he went and he filled it. I think the linebacker need is pretty legitimate in Philadelphia, and I do think there's a possibility they go and fill that. So to me, when I said that 49ers should go get a corner. Eagles should go get a linebacker. I think the Dallas Cowboys, no one's going to, I don't think anybody sees this at all as a need, but I think left tackle, Tyron Smith might not make it through the rest of the season. I think if he gets subtracted and they have to start shuffling that offensive line around, that could become a significant, and that's if there are no other injuries the rest of the season on the offensive line. That could undermine everything they're doing offensively. Like everyone's like, oh, Dak's throwing it downfield and this is great. Remove a left tackle permanently, okay, and then now have to start sliding guys around. And it could. So I think left tackle is a need there. Everyone wants to plug the more power factor sort of red zone running back. I get that. I do think that's a need, but I'm more worried about solidifying left tackle. I went through the list. I think I named nine. Okay, the Buffalo Bills. They go out and they get Leonard Fournette. Everyone's saying running back. I think what. If I'm the Buffalo Bills, you got ties to the New York Giants, I would reach out and say, hey, what if we give you a high pick for Leonard Williams? Because to me, I think you put Leonard Williams on the defensive line, you figure out how to bring in the salary, you reshuffle some things, you put him next to Ed Oliver on the defensive line. I think all of a sudden up front, Buffalo looks dominant again. And so every single one of these contending teams, Detroit, go get Brian Burns. I'd offer 2 firsts for Brian Burns if I was Detroit, and no, I'm going to extend him. And because to me, that's a long-term building block there. If you can't get it, I guess to me, if you could get Patrick Surtain, right, the second, if he was available for Denver, Detroit, then I'd say, okay, that's the defensive piece that you're going to have for the next 5, 6, 7 years. Go deal whatever you got to deal and get him. He's not available. Denver's not dealing that guy. Now, Burns, I do think is gettable. It's just that David Tepper in his mind, and they're saying that they want to keep him. David Tepper knows what was on the table last year, and it's hard to get that out of your head when now you could potentially field offers for him this year. When you don't hear 2 first-round picks, it's hard.
But they passed on the 2 first. Tell me if I'm wrong. They passed on the 2 first because not only is it this year hard to get that package out of your head from last year, it's also hard to find Brian Burns's. And so you get those 2 first, and that sounds great value-wise, but then in the draft, you're trying to find a Brian Burns.
But you're in a different position now this year if you're Carolina, because you dealt so many draft assets that now you're going, man, Tepper's
that's fair.
We really got to build around Bryce Young. They don't have a first next year. They don't.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're going, we got to build around Bryce Young. Well, how are we going to build around Bryce Young now when we've spent a bunch of these draft assets and we don't even have a number 1 wide receiver for him because we dealt him to go get Bryce Young? Well, what is it this year? It's a good offensive draft. There could be 5 wide receivers that go in the first round this year. There could be a multitude of quarterbacks.
So more incentive for them to move off of Burns than there was last year.
I think the incentive is that there's one he's at the end of the contract for Burns. So you're sitting here going, there's going to have to be a franchise tag involved here. And then if we do a deal with him, and remember, he's not a 17, 18, 19 sack guy. I'm not putting any shade on him, but I'm just saying
I
that
know what you're saying, though.
the 25, $26 million a year, edge rushers, 27 million, $30 million a year edge rushers moving forward. Those are the multitude of pressures. They are they convert 16, 17, 18 sacks. They're TJ Watt. Okay. They're Nick Bosa when Nick Bosa's playing like Nick Bosa. They're Aaron Donald. There's like 5 of those guys. I love Brian Burns. He's not one of those 5 guys right now. And if that's the kind of money he's going to be seeking, I can tell you right now, Tepper, they're going to go, we'll franchise him. We're not going to, it's hard to do a deal at this level with someone who's not in that echelon yet. So you go, I think,
but to your point, he looks great. He looks great opposite Aiden Hutchinson, though.
I mean, I think he's a good, I think he looks a fantastic player. I think if you plug him in next to Aiden Hutchinson, to me, now you are talking about 2 edge players that, go ahead, name me, go out and look at the NFL. How many other teams have, by the way, young, 2 high level pressure edge rushers on that, on par with Detroit, what they would have up front there.
Which is why which is why you were suggesting that Jacksonville go out and get Chase Young.
And I said Jacksonville, the reason I think Chase Young's really interesting with Jacksonville too, because part of the problem that Washington is having with Chase Young when teams call, and I think some teams are more interested in Montez Sweat because there's not the injury history. And they think like, okay, both these guys are probably going to draw decent contracts. If Chase Young had been healthy through his entire career, he's probably the more premium player at the position. But they're both good pass rushers. Montez, I think realistically, you got teams that are coming and saying, well, if we give you a 3rd round pick, maybe we can pry this guy loose and we'll let you go ahead and extend Chase Young. Well, Washington's a little nervous about a Chase Young extension, just like every other team in the NFL will be nervous about it. He's playing at an extremely high level, and you can see what that ceiling is and why he's loved so much in terms of when he's actually on the field producing. But you can't get the injury history out of your mind. He's almost like the Saquon Barkley of defense. And so, but to me, when you look at Jacksonville's rolled the dice 3 times on offense. They brought in Evan Ingram. They give Evan Ingram a pretty big deal. You bring in Christian Kirk. You give Christian Kirk a big deal, right? You bring in Calvin. A lot of people criticize that. You bring in Calvin Ridley, right? And people are like, geez. So to me, I see this penchant of the front office saying, hey, we're willing to take some shots on talent here. We're willing to roll the dice a little bit on talent here. And I'm like, that's the front office you need to you need to engage with a Chase Young trade because you're saying you've rolled the dice on offense and it's working pretty well. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster at times, but you can see how it will pay off and how it has paid off at times. Now, defensively, you take this guy and you add him next to Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker. Yeah.
And the way they're taking the ball away right now. Man.
And Mike, it's a multiplier. It's if you put Chase in there, I guarantee you it helps Trayvon Walker. You put Chase in there, it helps Josh Allen. And it changes that front from very talented, a lot of assets, buried into that defensive front. But now you're snapping your fingers and going, whoa, now it's really scary. And we got to pick, we're going to rob Peter to pay Paul in terms of our blocking schemes. One of these guys is going to get loose.
I love it. Yeah, I love the trade deadline. Not as much as I love the NFL draft. But I love the trade deadline because it's like what could happen, what should happen, and what almost happened is sometimes more interesting than what actually does happen. Hey, thanks so much for kicking it with your main man, Michael Smith. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Rate it, review it, tell your friends about it. Oh, and be sure to follow me on social media.